Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today is January 1st, 2022. It's literally the first Bible study of the new year, of the new secular year. Today we're going to continue in our study of the new humanity, and today this will be part 4 in that study. And I want to take you straight to the outline, and we will go straight to the text today. I don't think there's a need for me to give a review because I gave a pretty extensive review last week. So I think I just want to get straight to the material today. And as we go along, if I have to go back and review anything along the way, then I certainly can do that. So if you're following along in the notes, I'm on page 71 of the Spiritual Beings video notes collection. And we're looking at section 7.5. And this is Yahshua Story in the Gospels. So we're working our way from the outward into the inward, right? So at this point, we're sort of at the center of our discussion. So the outermost layer, if you will, or the outermost rectangle would be that cosmic story, the world story of mankind in general. And then as you work your way a little bit more inwards, then it starts narrowing down specifically to Israel's story, and all the various players in Israel's story, everyone from Noah to Abraham to Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and eventually Moses and Daniel, etc. So all these individuals who all had a piece of it, but didn't have the full piece. And then we work our way from the Israel story towards the center, which is the Yahshua story, right? So Yahshua is that perfect Israelite. Yahshua is that perfect witness. He is the one that is going to be able to fulfill what Israel should have fulfilled, right? In other words, whereas Abraham had a piece in Noah and Moses and all the others, none of them could do the ultimate fulfilling of that Israelite witness, but Yahshua could do that, and in fact, he did. And I want to, start this section here with something kind of something that I think is kind of interesting. And it's not here as part of the text necessarily, except maybe in a peripheral sense. But I want to go through it because I think it gives you a really strong sense of what we're seeing here. So we're going to come back to these notes in just a few minutes, but I want to take you very briefly to Isaiah 53. And I want to do that in a specific Bible version. And I did this years ago, probably over 20 years ago in a sermon. And I literally just remembered it this morning. I was looking at something completely different. And when I saw it, then I said to myself, this is pretty interesting. I think this is something that I might be able to bring into the study today that I think is rather interesting. So I'm going to take you to a particular version of Isaiah 53, and it's part of something known as the Anchor Yale Bible Commentaries, the Anchor Yale Bible Commentaries. And this particular volume that we're going to review is actually one that when they first came out with the series, and I want to say that was sometime in the late 60s, early 70s. I don't remember exactly, but when I first began studying the Bible, I remember running across this, and it was known then only as the Anchor Bible series. And what it was one of the very early commentaries, and it was one that they got a bunch of scholars together, and they said, okay, each one of you take a book of the Bible, whether you're an Old Testament scholar or you're a New Testament scholar, and you want to the extent that you can, give a fresh translation of that. In other words, don't just go and pull an old translation. Most of the commentaries that you see nowadays, in terms of several scholars, like a compendium of scholars. Usually what they do is they pick a Bible version, New International Version or English Standard Version or whatever it may be, and then they build their commentary around that particular version of the Bible that they're using. But something like the old Anchor Bible series, each scholar just did their own translation, literally, right? So they did if you were an Old Testament scholar and you were specialist in Hebrew and Aramaic, etc., then you did your thing and you came up with your own commentary. And if you were a specialist in Greek, then you would do your New Testament commentary. And that's what they did. And then not only did they do the actual translation, but then they did the commentary on that translation. And so this particular one was done by a Catholic scholar by the name of John Mackenzie. And John Mackenzie is actually, let me see here. Okay, well, the older version is the one I actually wanted to look at by a guy named John Mackenzie, but this one here is the newer version. This is not John Mackenzie. This is the Anchor Bible. Later, they did revisions, and they got other scholars to do things later. And this particular one, which is a translation and commentary of Isaiah 40 through 55, and usually they break up Isaiah, and there are a number of reasons that I won't go into why they do that. But this particular translation of Isaiah 40 to 55 is done by an individual named Joseph Blenkinsop. He's not the one that I want to share with you per se, but there's still value because I looked at the translation this morning, and I hadn't seen it for a while, the Anchor Bible one. So I automatically assumed it was Mackenzie, but it's not Mackenzie. So I'm not going to be able to bring out all the things I wanted to bring out, but still, it's quite interesting, quite good. So I want to share with you Blenkensop's translation of Isaiah 53. So just bear with me here as I pull that up. And I just want you to listen to a little bit of this of Isaiah 53, because as we go through that, I think it's going to help you to better understand the material that we're going to cover today, and Yahweh willing next week, and perhaps the week after that, if we need to do 3 sections. So let me take you to Isaiah 53. Okay, so listen to this translation. It's probably a little bit different than what you usually hear. And I love the personalized translations because they tend to have a little bit more nuance than some of the more common translations that are done by committee, right? So this is Blenkensop's translation. Understanding that Isaiah 53 is talking about the suffering servant. In other words, this individual who would be the Israelite, who is going to fulfill what Yahweh said he would do through Israel. And in addition, he is the man, the perfect man, right? He is the second Adam, as Paul refers to him, who would fulfill and does fulfill the vocation of mankind. And he leads the way by example. So Isaiah 53, who would believe what we have heard? To whom has, and he uses the version Yahweh, but we'll say Yahweh, to whom has Yahweh's power been revealed? He grew up, all of this referring to the suffering servant, he grew up like a sapling in Yahweh's presence, rooted in the parched ground. He had no outward beauty, no distinction. We saw nothing in his appearance to attract us. So marred, in other words, almost disfigured, right? So marred was his appearance beyond human semblance, his form beyond human likeness. So there's like the description that you see in this and the next several verses is almost like there's like a sickliness to him, right? But that sickliness is not because of he himself, right? Because he himself was a strong figure, right? But something made him sickly. What is it that made him sickly? Well, what made him sickly is that he took upon himself all of the evil and all of the, I mean, can you imagine taking the weight of the world, so to speak, in a metaphorical sense, on your shoulders? It would make anyone sick, right? So he had no outward beauty, no distinction. He wasn't the typical protagonist, the typical heroic figure that comes riding in shining armor, right? On the contrary, he looked sickly, right? Because he took pain upon himself, you see. This is a very different picture. It's like when Yahshua told the disciples when they were arguing about who's going to sit on his right hand and who's going to sit on his left when he comes into his kingdom. He said, we're not going to do it that way. That's how the Gentiles do things, by the sight of their eyes and thinking that power is this way, when power is really the other way. What other way? This way. So marred, so disfigured was his appearance beyond human semblance, his form beyond human likeness. He was despised, shunned by people. Is that what a ruler should be like? Shunned, despised by people? A man who suffered, no stranger to sickness, like one from whom people turn away their gaze. It's very hard to be in the presence of illness. If any of you have ever dealt with a sick family member or someone who becomes disabled, it's very difficult to be in the presence of that individual because you love them and because you know what they were. But oftentimes you find that because of their physical condition or their mental condition, they're sort of a shadow of what they once used to be. It's very difficult to be in the presence of a person like that. That's what makes it an act of love, right? An act of self-sacrifice when you do that. And I don't mean that in any noble sort of way. It's just that it's an act of love to be able to minister to someone who's ill, especially someone. It's hard enough with a stranger, much less to someone who is near and dear to you, right? So if you've ever been around someone who you love, I remember when my mother was dying, it was very, very painful to be around her, to see how far she had deteriorated, and to see that in the day to day, right? So this is what is being described here. It's a person that you almost turn your gaze away because you just can't bear to look upon it, right? He was despised, and we held him of no account. In other words, it's this picture of abandonment, of rejection. Yet, despite this personage and how people would want to turn away from him, yet it was he who bore our affliction. He who bore the burden of our sufferings. We reckon him stricken, smitten by Elohim, and afflicted. And I don't want you to miss this, right? Smitten by Elohim, right? And afflicted. In other words, this was Yahweh's will. It's like when Yahshua goes before Yahweh in prayer in the garden, he says, if it's possible, I really would not want to do this, right? If it's possible, take this cup away from me. But ultimately he said, but you know what? This is your decision, not mine. Your will, not mine. So if I have to do it, I have to do it. I'd rather not, but if I have to do it, this is the only way, so be it, because it's your will. Yet he was wounded because of our transgressions, crushed on account of our iniquities. And notice it's an act of sacrifice, right? He's wounded and stricken. It was he who bore our affliction. He bore the burden of our sufferings. Who is the our? The our is you, is me, is this world. Every human being, every man, every woman, Adam, right? Why do we suffer? Why do we have affliction? Why do we have sufferings? Because of transgressions, because of iniquities, because of the fall in the garden, which perpetuates year after year for thousands of years, quite literally. He was wounded because of our transgressions, crushed on account of our iniquities. On him was laid the chastisement that made us whole. That's a mouthful. On him was laid the chastisement, the rebuke that made us whole. That's what made us be able to be whole before Almighty Yahweh. We found healing because of his wounds. See, these are the things that we kind of bring around during Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread time, but they get lost in platitudes in this world, right? You hear these things and everyone this kind of thing. So I'm not saying you and me necessarily, but you hear these things in religious circles, and there's like an aura of the angels sing, and there's this veneer of holiness, and in sort of a mystical, ethereal sort of way. And this everything's kind of bathed in light and all that. And do we embrace what this actually means for us? Forget all the prettiness. Forget all the hark the herald angels sing and all the other stuff, right? What does this mean for us? He faced and confronted the powers of darkness, the powers and iniquities that were unleashed in the garden. upon the world. And were it not for him taking all that upon himself, were it not for him confronting the powers of darkness, we'd have no hope. We had all gone astray like sheep, all of us going our own way. This is humanity, right? But Yahweh laid upon him the iniquity of us all. He was abused, yet he was submissive. He did not open his mouth. In other words, he did it willingly. This is Philippians 2 type stuff, right? Where in humility, being a king, he laid it aside so that he could do this. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. And of course, we see parallels of this in his actual actions before Pilate, before the Sanhedrin, before others, right? He was abused, yet he was submissive. He did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, like a ewe that is dumb before the shearers. This is why you look in the book of Revelation and Revelation chapter 5, and John is crying, right? He's in the vision because there's no one who can open the seals. There's no one who's worthy. And then he sees the lamb that's as if it had been wounded. And because of that lamb that had been wounded, those seals can now be opened and those mysteries can be revealed. And then he could see what was to come. He was like a lamb to the slaughter, like a ewe that is dumb before the shearers. He did not open his mouth. And I love this translation. It's very similar, as I recall, to the Mackenzie version. By oppressive acts of judgment, he was led away. I love that. That's so accurate. By oppressive acts of judgment, he was led away. And who gives a thought to his fate? Who cared, right? He was led away. He was led to slaughter by acts of oppression, by corrupt judgments, perversions of justice. And who cared is essentially what it's saying there. Who thought twice about it, right? He was being beset by the powers of darkness. This is Daniel 7 stuff, right? He was cut off from the land of the living, stricken to death for his people's sin. His grave was located with the wicked, his sepulcher with reprobates. And we see parallels of this in Matthew and other places. Though he had done no violence and no falsehood was on his tongue, he spoke the truth. But it was Yahweh's good pleasure to crush him. Isn't that crazy? It was Yahweh's good pleasure to crush him. He brought sickness upon him, is what the parenthetical says, right? In other words, it was Yahweh's good pleasure to bring sickness upon him. Why was it his good pleasure? Because Yahweh's a sadist? No, because this was something that was fulfillment of prophecy, right? This is Genesis 3:15 that we talked about last week. He will crush your head, adversary, but you will bruise his heel. If his life, and I love this too, if his life is laid down as a guilt offering, he will see posterity, he will prolong his days. As I recall, the Mackenzie version says something like, if his life is poured out like a drink offering or something of that nature. And maybe I'm wrong about that translation. It's been so long since I look at it, but it's something like, it's like his life was poured out. If his life is laid down as a guilt offering, he will see posterity. This is more than likely the term asham, which is a particular type of sacrifice, which is usually translated as a guilt offering. He will see posterity. He will prolong his days. This tells you the aftermath, right? He'll lay down his life as a guilt offering, but it doesn't end there. He lays down his life as a guilt offering, but as a result of that, as a consequence of that, this is the end result. He will see posterity. He will prolong his days. Right? This could be referring to he himself through his resurrection, but it also would be through his posterity, his servants, you, me, the apostles, right? Not in that order, right? In other words, he continues to live and his message continues to live through his servants because he taught his servants what it is to be, to have the vocation of a true Adam. He will see posterity. He will prolong his days. Through him, Yahweh's purpose will prevail. What was Yahweh's purpose? His purpose was to have a people for his own possession, right? Humanity as co-rulers with Yahweh. Through him, Yahweh's purpose will prevail. And I love this translation in verse 11. After his painful life, he will see light and be satisfied. That's a wonderful translation. And I'm going to show you just by means of comparison what the traditional translation would be like there. That's verse 11 of chapter 53. So it says, see, to me, it's a boring translation. This is NIV. It says, After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. It's nice, but it's not this. After his painful life, he will see light and be satisfied. It's wonderful. By his knowledge, my servant will vindicate many. In other words, because of our knowledge of him, when we know about him, he's going to vindicate us. You see, he's going to vindicate humanity. What Adam could not do, he will do. By his knowledge, my servant will vindicate many. It is he who bears the burden of their iniquities. Therefore, I allot his portion with the great. With the powerful, he will share the spoil. Since he poured out, this is the idea of pouring out again, right? Since he poured out his lifeblood to death, I love that, and was numbered among transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many and interceded for their transgressions. It's just an amazing, amazing passage of scripture. And there's all kinds of notes here that I just don't have time to go through, but just very, very fascinating stuff. I mean, the reasons why he translated this way or that, and why he decided in his commentary, and then he gives you actual commentary after that. Says you can lose yourself in studying these things. It's great stuff. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you as sort of an overarching viewpoint here. Let's go back to the notes. Okay, hopefully you see that. And you should see section 7.5 now, right? Yahshua Story in the Gospels. The 4 gospel accounts in the New Testament all portray Yahshua in their different ways as the one in whom all of these promises find fulfillment. All of what promises? The promises and everything that we've covered up to this point. This is why the stories emphasize Yahshua's conflict with spiritual evil from the very start. And then we'll say here, Yahshua's eternal human identity. 1, after the litany of heroic failures from the Hebrew Bible, in other words, the heroic failures of all these personages, Abraham, Jacob, etc., who did not fulfill the ultimate purpose, the Gospels present Yahweh's surprising solution. And we just saw it in Isaiah 53. To the cosmic crisis and the failure of Israel. So moving in from the concentric rectangles, right? The creator Elohim who called Israel into being will himself become human in the person of the eternal Son. Son, S-O-N. Yahshua will be the humanity that we could not be for ourselves. And he will be Israel in order to fulfill its calling to the nations. And that's how you see that in the book of Isaiah, in the servant songs, you have Israel, the nation, and then represented by Israel, the individual, which is an Israelite, who is Yahshua. 2, Yahshua's Holy Spirit conception is presented as the way, and let me not lose sight of this here, in order to fulfill its calling to the nations, right? Because he gave a promise. Yahweh gave a promise to Abraham. He said that all the nations would be blessed through him. Yahshua's Holy Spirit conception is presented as the way that the creator Elohim enters into and becomes one with his human creations. Okay, so there's a twinge of, in the way in which he's describing this, there's a twinge of Trinity in there, which we won't go into today. But I could still get on board with what he's saying, that that Elohim becomes flesh. That is true through the Holy Spirit, through the power of the Holy Spirit, because we're told here in Luke that that's exactly what happened. The angel answered and said to Miriam, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And for that reason, the Holy One to be born shall be called the Son of Elohim. Okay, so that's pretty clear. Yahshua as the ultimate eternal human partner. 1, recall how the plot tension generated by Genesis 1-3, and that's the story of the creation and the fall. Recall how the plot tension generated by Genesis 1-3 created the need for a human who can not only partner with Elohim, but also transcend death itself. The Gospels portray Yahshua as the one in whom Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, is coming among his people to accomplish this very task. And he is referred to as Yahweh, right? We'll get to the verses on the right side in a minute. 2, notice how Mark's gospel begins with an extended quotation of Isaiah 40, verses 1 to 3, combined with wording from Malachi 3:1 and Exodus 23:20, which summons a prophetic herald to announce the arrival of Yahweh. What is that prophetic herald? That prophetic herald is the herald of the good news, right? It's what you see in Isaiah 57, for example. The beginning of the good news, we're on the right side here, in Mark 1:1 to 4, and then 9 to 11. The beginning of the good news, gospel, of Yahshua Messiah, the Son of Elohim. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, make ready the way of Yahweh. It's interesting, when you go look at that passage, it could be potentially translated one of two ways. Like here, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, and then the voice of one crying in the wilderness, and we understand that to be, for example, John the Baptist, right? But it says, make ready the way of Yahweh, make his path straight. John the Baptist appears in the wilderness, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. It's interesting, because you have this, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Who's the one crying in the wilderness? Well, the Elijah message, and this is John the Baptist, right? John the Baptizer. But then in the very next section, it talks about Yahshua's initial victory over Satan. And where does he have this victory? He has that victory in the wilderness, right? As soon as he's baptized, what happens? He's sent out into the wilderness to, so to speak, right, in the desert, the wilderness, into the Judean desert. He's sent out into the wilderness to be tested, as we know it. And there are all kinds of parallels to the Old Testament. But so it's interesting, because this translation in the Hebrew, is it the voice of one crying in the wilderness, as in John? It could also be the voice of one crying. And now this is what he cries, the voice of one crying. In the wilderness, make ready the way of Yahweh, right? So it could be, the translation could go either way. So I think that most commentators usually go this route, right? The voice of one crying in the wilderness, but it could be theoretically, conceptually translated, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make ready the way of Yahweh, which would match with this as well. Either way works, to be honest. John the Baptist appears in the wilderness, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. In those days, Yahshua came, this is verse 9, in those days, Yahshua came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening, and the Spirit like a dove descending upon him. And a voice came out of the heavens, you are my beloved Son, in you I am well pleased. So going to number 3 on the left-hand side, Mark clearly identifies John the Baptizer as the heralding voice who will prepare Israel for Yahweh's arrival. Then number 4, notice the narrative logic. If John is the herald for Yahweh, then Yahshua's arrival is equated with the arrival of Yahweh. Yeah, because he's also referred to as Yahweh, right? And you see that throughout the Old and New Testaments. Yahshua's initial victory over the Satan. 1, 3 of the 4 gospel accounts locate the beginning of Yahshua's kingdom announcement in his baptism and subsequent testing in the wilderness. Luke's account is an excellent example. And this is from Luke 4, 1 to 13. Yahshua, full of the Holy Spirit, so we don't even have to go to accordance today, because we have a lot of these verses here. Yahshua, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led around by the Spirit in the wilderness. So we have many people who saw their original, let me stop that for a minute. So we have many individuals, we have precedent for how individuals were matured, if you will, in the wilderness. Examples, Moses, right? Moses was sent into the wilderness of sin in order to become who he became. David, where did David learn to be king? He didn't learn to be king in Saul's court. He learned to be king in the fields. He learned to be king in the wilderness, in isolation, as Yahweh molded him, as he took him through trials with the lion and the bear. And furthermore, even once he killed the giant, you would think that everyone would have dragged him over to become king. Didn't happen, right? He spent another 7 years before he was able to become king in Hebron, and then another few years before he became king in Judah, right? it's a process. It's a process. And he learned in flight, fleeing from Saul, fleeing from death. He learned with the lowly of the earth, right? It says, it describes in the book of Samuel, it describes men who were, sort of the dregs of society, who owed money and who were, kind of out in the fringes. And he learned to deal with people that way. And he learned about loyalty, and he learned about what it meant to give orders and to receive orders, and to have failures and defeats in battle and everything else. Right? And he went to the Philistines, and he had to run away with the spittle running down his, he had to act like he was mad because they were onto his game, you see.
Okay, now I'm on the right mic, I think. How's that sound? Okay, all right. I have a good mic up there, but it's not as good as the one here. So anyway, we're back in business. So David learned to be king on the run. He learned to be king in the soup, right? Going through difficulties and going through trials. He didn't learn it through some carefully coordinated, program of training and instruction in the courts of King Saul. That's not where he learned to be king. He learned to be king in the wilderness. Moses didn't learn how to be king in Pharaoh's court, right? And I don't mean king, he wasn't king, I mean metaphorically speaking, right? He didn't learn to be king, to be leader in the middle of Pharaoh's court. He got educated in Pharaoh's court, but he didn't learn how to be a leader in Pharaoh's court. That he learned in the thickness of the desert, you see. And when you go back to Yahshua, right, and I can point to several other examples, King Saul, right? Not King Saul, Saul, the apostle, later in time, right? Saul didn't become Saul, or Saul to Paul, right? Saul didn't become Paul in the halls of Gamaliel. He learned plenty in the walls of Gamaliel, but he didn't become Paul, except when he had to leave for a period of time, 3 years or more, where he had to be in Arabia, relearning the things that he had learned because he had to reframe them and understand them better. You see, it's just kind of a pattern that you see in the scriptures. And Yahshua was no different, right? He said an example, as a matter of fact. He learned and he did what he had to do in the wilderness, yes? So Yahshua, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led around by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing during those days. And when they had ended, he became hungry. And the devil said to him, "If you are the Son of Elohim, tell this stone to become bread." And Yahshua answered him, "It is written, men shall not live on bread alone." And I don't have time to go through every single one of these the nuances, but this is where he's learning how to minister, right? And he led him up and showed him all this is where he's getting his first taste in his human flesh, right? He's getting his first taste of confrontation with evil. And boy, what a doozy it is, right? He confronts the adversary himself. Now, we have no record of his childhood or of his youth, yes? We don't know what he may have faced then, but that's not made known to us by Yahweh. What all is made known to us is what we see here. So this is the only thing that we can go by. And what we have to go by is this is the first time that he's confronting those spiritual darkness in the ministry that he was given to fulfill the vocation of Adam. And he led him up. Yahweh led him there, right? He led him up, and excuse me, I'm sorry. That's not what that's referring to the adversary, right? But I'm saying that Yahweh he sent them, he drove him into the wilderness. We don't see that in Luke, but we see that in one of the other passages, maybe in Matthew or in Mark. I'd have to go and look at it, but we see it here, and was led around by the Spirit in the wilderness, right? So this is the Spirit of Yahweh that drives him into the wilderness, just like Moses was driven into the wilderness, and David, etc., because Yahweh teaches in the way that he intends. And you have all these biblical examples, and then here you have always the contrast, right? So Satan leads him up. He leads him up and shows him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, "I will give you all this domain and its glory." Notice that. I will give you all this domain, as if it's his to give. It's not his to give. For it has been handed over to me. Yeah, you're like everything else, you're telling part of the story. It hasn't been given to you. It's been given to you as a temporary thing to do your thing. But who has it been given to? It's been given to Yahweh and the saints of the Most High. That's who it's been given to. For it's been handed over to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. Really? No. Therefore, if you worship me, it shall all be yours. Yahshua answered him, it is written, you shall worship Yahweh your Elohim and serve him only. End the discussion. And he led him to Jerusalem and had him stand at the pinnacle of the temple, a really high spot in the temple, said to him, if you are the son of Elohim, that's not the first time that he insults him, right? We already saw him say, if you are the son of Elohim. There's a lot of ifs with this one, right? Therefore, if you worship me, if you are the son of Elohim. So he's going to play to his identity. Are you really the son of Elohim? If you are the son of Elohim, throw yourself down from here. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you. And on their hands they will bear you up so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. And Yahshua answered, and I'm thinking, how dare he, right? And Yahshua answered and said to him, it is said, you shall not put Yahweh your Elohim to the test. Who did he think he was speaking to? When the devil had finished every test, he left him until an opportune time. Notice that he didn't completely leave him, but he left him until an opportune time. What would be the opportune time? When he's his weakest, right? Because that's when this coward attacks, right? When the devil had finished every test, he left him until an opportune time. Yahshua's test is presented here as the climactic next step of both the cosmic storyline of Genesis 1 to 3 and also of the Israel storyline of Genesis 12 onward. So it's the Genesis 1 through 3, the creation and the fall of man, the creation, the commission to mankind for a vocation to serve and to rule with Yahweh, and also of the Israel storyline continued in Genesis 12. So here's the comparison here, right? 40 days in the wilderness. Yeah. So let me start from right to left. So Israel's story is 40 years in the wilderness. Well, Yahshua's story is 40 days in the wilderness. And we see him tempted for 40 days. Israel's story shows the wilderness is where Israel tested Elohim and disobeyed the will of Yahweh. The wilderness in Yahshua's story is where Yahshua obeys the will of the Father and does not put him to the test. He could have put him to the test because that's what Satan told him to do, right? Put him to the test. Is he really going to take care of you if you throw yourself from here? Shouldn't he send someone to intervene on your behalf, right? Shouldn't he send an angel to intervene on your behalf? Put him to the test. This wasn't the wilderness where Moses strikes the rock and says, shall we bring you water? No. He says, you're going to obey Yahweh. You're going to obey Yahweh alone. It's Yahweh's will and in his time and in his way, because it's Yahweh's to give or not give. See, Yahshua had the right answer. In Yahshua's first and last test, what was his first test? This one. What is his last test? The cross. In Yahshua's first and last test, he responds to the Satan by quoting from Deuteronomy 8:3 and 6:16, passages that recall Israel's failure in the wilderness. All right. What does Deuteronomy 8:3 say? He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. He doesn't live by the provisions of what's, just the superficial, what's before you. He lives and breathes by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. And what does it say over in 6:16? Do not put Yahweh your Elohim to the test as you did at Massah. Right? So let's go back to, all right. The point, Yahshua is reversing the failure of Israel in the wilderness. He's reversing the failure of Israel in the wilderness. And I might add that reversing the failure of Adam, right? He's reversing the failure of Israel in the wilderness and so proves himself as Israel's true royal priestly representative who can fulfill the nation's calling before Elohim. Let's compare to that situation with Adam. So humanity's story, right? Adam, the first son of Elohim, see Genesis 5:1-3, is tested in the garden. Okay. And we don't have to go review the passage. You know the passage well. Yahshua's story, the son is tested in the wilderness. Humanity's story, Adam and Eve were tested by the snake in Eden, the high garden temple. Yahshua's story, the Satan's test that Yahshua could take power over the nations happens on high, the pinnacle, right? Which is a very high spot. So Eden, as you recall, it's not clear from Genesis 1 and 2, but when you compare the various scriptures about Eden, it's a description of a high temple-like area. So Eden is not just some flat plain. Eden is a high place, if you will, but not the high places of the pagans. It's a mountain. It's a high garden temple. And when you look at the model of the tabernacle and the temple, it's meant to elicit what you found at Eden. Then humanity's test is about how, so Satan takes them to a similar thing, is the point, right? He takes them to the pinnacle of the temple, a high place of the temple, to be able to see everything, you see. It's always about this counterfeit, point, counterpoint. Humanity's test is about how they will become co-rulers with Yahweh in Eden. Genesis 1:26-28. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let him have dominion over, etc., right? The Satan's test is about how Yahshua will become the ruler of the world. I will give you. No, Yahweh will give me. Yahweh has given me. So you see this comparison both with the Israel story, right? And you see it with the cosmic story. So he's kind of going, outward towards the outermost the outermost rectangle, right? So for both Israel's story and humanity's story, the cosmic story, the Yahshua story is at the heart of all of it, is what the point of all this is, right? So in each case, Yahshua resists the temptation to grab political power on his own terms, and he deprives himself of food and honor, trusting that his Father will deliver him. Because ultimately, it's not about the food. It's not about the honor. It's not about the spoils, right? That's how the kings of the earth do it. Like Yahshua said to his disciples, that's how they do that. That's not how Yahweh does it. It's Philippians 2. It's hiding his uniqueness as someone who's akin to Elohim, so that he can fulfill Yahweh's will in human form, trusting that his Father will deliver him. In this way, he overcomes the testing of the Satan. In other words, what Adam could not do, he did. In this way, he overcomes the testing of the Satan and submits himself to the road of hardship that lays ahead. And by the way, that's very important to note. He wasn't, by rejecting that test, you would think that the immediate reward is glory, right? It wasn't immediate. Again, it was a process. There was going to be pain. And that's what makes it remarkable, is that he gave himself willingly to do that, fully knowing the pain that he was going to experience. It's Isaiah 53 stuff, right? It's willingly giving himself to that. It's sort of like, again, it's servant leader stuff. It's the followers doing what the leader does by example. It's Psalm 110, right? Let's go to Psalm 110 very quickly. He's the example. Yahweh says to my sovereign, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. There's a process here. Sit at my right hand. This is Daniel language. Until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. There's a cleanup operation in process, but it is a process. It doesn't happen immediately. Yahweh will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. And look at this, your troops will be willing on your day of battle. So as the master, so the troops. As the master, so the subjects. Your troops will be willing as their master was willing on your day of battle. Arrayed in holy splendor, your young men will come to you like dew from the morning's womb. They'll come to you voluntarily. Yahweh has sworn and will not change his mind. You were a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Yahweh is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead and crushing the rulers of the whole earth. This is your heritage. This is your destiny, Messiah. He will drink from a brook along the way, and so he will lift his head high. That's Gideon language. The ones who were whittled down from several hundred or thousands that had been there originally, they were whittled down to about 300 who drank from the brook who a certain way, right? Because it's not about numbers, it's about quality. And you look at Psalm 40, Yahshua, right? I waited patiently for Yahweh. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. This is one who is suffering. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. This would be the fate of Jeremiah, right? He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our Elohim. Many will see and fear Yahweh and put their trust in him. Blessed is the one who trusts in Yahweh, who does not look to the proud, to those who turn aside the false Elohim. Many Yahweh Elohim are the wonders you have done, the things you planned for us. None can compare with you. Were I to speak and tell of your deeds, there would be too many to declare. And then note, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but my ears you have opened. And there are different translations here. Some have here, if you look down lower left, Hebrew, some Septuagint manuscripts, the Greek version of the scriptures written in Alexandria, Egypt, some Septuagint manuscripts, but a body you have prepared for me. It's very interesting language. Instead of my ears you have opened. But let's just go with this, but my ears you have opened. What is that? My ears you have opened. My ear, you've pierced it. Whose ear is pierced? In the law, the servant who gives himself willingly and wholly, H-W-H-O-L-L-Y, wholly to the master, the one who says, I don't want to leave you. I want to be your servant forever. I want to be your bond servant forever. What do? You take him, you put his ear on the door, and you pierce his ear into the doorpost. Sacrifice and offer you did not desire, but my ears you have opened. You pierced my ear because I willingly offered myself to you as a bondservant. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Then I said, here I am. I've come. It is written about me in the scroll. What is all this? 6, 7, 8. This is Yahshua. This is messianic language. I said, here I am. I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. Or come, I with the scroll written for me. Look in the lower left. Alternate translations. I desire to do your will, O my Elohim. Your law is within my heart. You see all that? I proclaim your saving acts in the great assembly. I do not seal my lips, Yahweh, as you know, etc., etc. Okay. So this is all, this is all messianic language. Troubles, verse 12, for troubles without number surround me. The evil forces seem to always be circling this one. Troubles without number surround me. My sins have overtaken me and I cannot see. And of course, this is poetic language because he doesn't have sin. He doesn't have iniquity, but the iniquities of others, right, have overtaken him. I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head and my heart fails within me. Be pleased to save me, Yahweh. And there's that term for salvation, right? Come quickly, Yahweh, to help me. May all who want to take my life be put to shame and confusion. May all who desire my ruin be turned back in disgrace. May those who say to me, aha, aha, be appalled at their own shame. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who long for your saving help always say, Yahweh is great. May those who long for your saving help, Teshua. May those who long for your saving help always say, Yahweh is great. But as for me, I am poor and needy. May Yahweh think of me. You are my help and my deliverer. You are my Elohim. Do not delay. That's Psalm 40. But the first reason I went to this one was because of the language in 6, 7, 8, right? I desire to do your will. I willingly give myself. I willingly offer myself. And this is what you're seeing described in these passages. Isaiah 53 and others, Psalm 110, etc. Okay, let's go back to our notes here. So it's a picture of one that's surrounded by darkness, but he willingly gives himself to it because he knows that there's a greater thing to be done. And this is a companion to point 3. Yahshua resists the temptation to grab political power on his own terms, and he deprives himself of food and honor, trusting that his father will deliver him. In this way, he overcomes the testing of the Satan and submits himself to the road of hardship that lays ahead. See, you might say that Adam and Eve, they wanted that co-rulership with Yahweh on their own terms. They wanted it. I mean, this is a bit of a preaching of what's the word I'm looking for, of midrash on my part, of a speculative interpretation, but I believe it's consistent with the sense of what's going on here. You might say that they wanted to have their destiny, their vocation, in their own terms, in comfort, and their punishment, their consequence of their action, essentially removes that comfort from them completely. Now you're going to till the earth, and it's going to give thorns and thistles, and you wanted comfort, and instead what you're going to get is anything worse than you ever possibly imagined. You see, by comparison, Yahshua says, whatever I have to go through in order to make this right, in order to flip this ugliness upside down, I'll go through it. I'll take it upon myself, so that this creation of yours, of this humanity, so that they can have an opportunity to enjoy life in abundance the way it was meant for them in the beginning. He reverses, in other words, he reverses the curse of Eden. So Yahshua was going, this is on the right-hand side, Yahshua was going through all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness among the people. See, he's bringing healing, he's bringing restoration, right? He's reversing the curse of Eden. The news about him spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all who were ill, those suffering with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, epileptics, paralytics, and he healed them. What are all those things? The demoniacs and epileptics, paralytics, they're all perversions of nature. They're all perversions of good things. The things that mankind was supposed to enjoy, it's twisted now. You see, it's things. Whereas there's supposed to be health, there's illness. Whereas there's supposed to be sound mind, there's this oppression of demons, and right. It's the thorns and thistles of the spirit world, the thorns and thistles of the mind, the thorns and thistles of the natural order. And Yahshua is reversing it. When John the Baptizer is in doubt as to, is this the one? What does Yahshua say? He says, go tell them the blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk, right? Go tell them. Why? Because he would know. Isaiah 35, the desert and the parched land, the wilderness and the desert will be glad, and the Arabah will rejoice and blossom. Wilderness and the desert. How is it possible that the wilderness and the desert are going to be glad? They're not glad places. They're places of darkness and places of howling winds and sandstorms and everything else. How are they going to be glad? The Arabah will rejoice and blossom. The Arabah is a wasteland. Like the crocus, it will blossom profusely and rejoice with rejoicing and shout of joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of Yahweh, the majesty of our Elohim. Encourage the exhausted and strengthen the feeble. Say to those with anxious heart, take courage, fear not. Behold, your Elohim will come with vengeance. The recompense of Elohim will come, but he will save you. There's the word Yasha. Everywhere you see this term in some way, shape, or form of salvation. He will save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will shout for joy. Everything, the curse will be reversed, right? Waters will break forth in the wilderness of all places, and streams in the Arabah. The scorched land will become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals, where the jackals lie around, right? Its resting place, grass becomes reeds and rushes. A highway will be there, a roadway, and it'll be called the Highway of Holiness. The unclean will not travel on it, but it will be for him who walks that way. And fools will not wander on it. Not anymore. No lion will be there. There's no violence there, right? The lion's a predator. It's a beautiful animal, but it's a predator. Nor will any vicious beast go up on it. These will not be found there, but the redeemed will walk there, and the ransomed of Yahweh will return and come with joyful shoutings as Zion, with everlasting joy upon their heads. They'll find gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. And if that wasn't enough, Isaiah 42 talks about the servant. He says, my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom my soul delights. I put my spirit upon him. He'll bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry out or raise his voice. He's not going to make a scene and bring drama into the thing. Doesn't have to. He's got power. He's got authority. Nor make his voice heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break. A bruised reed is useless. It dangles. But he's not going to break it. He's going to restore it. A dimly burning wick he will not extinguish. A dimly burning wick is enough to just go and it's done. But he's not going to extinguish it. He's going to rekindle the flame until it's burning brightly. He'll faithfully bring forth justice, justice that had been almost ready to be extinguished because it's barely seen in the land anymore. He will not be disheartened or crushed until he has established justice in the earth. Still what we all long for. And the coastlands will wait expectantly for his law. Thus says Yahweh Elohim, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and its offspring. This is creationism again, right? Creation is being restored, you see. Yahweh, who created the heavens and stretched them out broadly for beauty, who spread out the earth and its offspring, who gives breath to the people on it. He's an Elohim of life. He gives breath. He gives the neshama to bring breath and life to people. That's the word neshama on the bottom there. And spirit to those who walk in it. I'm Yahweh. I have called you in righteousness. I'll also hold you by the hand and watch over you. And I will appoint you as a covenant to the people. This is the Messiah, right? I will appoint you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the nations, to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from the dungeon, and those who dwell in darkness from the prison. I am Yahweh, that is my name. I will not give my glory to another, nor my praise to graven images. Behold, the former things have come to pass. Now I declare new things, like Yahshua said, behold, I'm making all things new. The book of Revelation. Before they spring forth, I proclaim them to you. Sing to Yahweh a new song. Look at the emphasis always on newness, chadash. Sing to Yahweh a new song. Sing his praise from the end of the earth. You who go down to the sea and all that is in it, you islands, and those who dwell on them. Let the wilderness and its cities lift up their voices. The settlements where Kedar inhabits, let the inhabitants of Selah sing aloud. Let them shout for joy from the tops of the mountains. Let them give glory to Yahweh and declare his praise in the coastlands. Yahweh will go forth like a warrior. He will arouse his zeal like a man of war. He will utter a shout. Yes, he will raise a war cry. He will prevail against his enemies. Psalm 110 language, right? I have kept silent for a long time. It's been a long time coming. I've kept still and restrained myself. Now, like a woman in labor, I will groan. It's time. It's time. I will both gasp and pant. I'll lay waste the mountains and hills and wither all their vegetation. I'll make the rivers into coastlands and dry up the ponds. Everything that seems to be one way, I'm going to turn into another, right? It's just like in the earlier chapter in Isaiah 40, he's going to make we'll come back to Isaiah 42, but look at 40, where he's talking about comfort, right? Clear the way. This is the voice calling. And notice this translation, NASB, they do it the other way. A voice is calling. What is it calling? Clear the way for Yahweh in the wilderness, you see. The other one says a voice is calling in the wilderness, right? The voice is calling. Clear the way for Yahweh in the wilderness. Make smooth in the desert a highway for Elohim. Let every valley be lifted up. We live here in where I live in Pennsylvania. We live in a valley. The valley is going to be lifted up. It's not going to be in the depression of the valley. It'll be lifted up, and the mountain and the hill is going in the opposite direction. The rough ground is becoming a plain, the rugged terrain, a broad valley. In other words, Yahweh is going to restore what he wants to restore, and he'll make everything the way that he wants to make it. Then the glory of Yahweh will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together. Why? Because the mouth of Yahweh has spoken, right? Go back to Isaiah 42. Verse 14. I kept silent for a long time, but it's time. I'll lay, verse 15, I'll lay waste the mountains and hills and wither all their vegetation. I'll make the rivers into coastlands and dry up the ponds. I will lead the blind by a way they do not know, and paths they do know, I will guide them. I'll make darkness into light before them, and rugged places into plains. These are the things I will do, and I will not leave them undone. They will be turned back and be utterly put to shame who trust in idols, who say to molten images, you are our Elohim. Hear, you deaf. Look, you blind, that you may see. Who's blind but my servant, or so deaf as my messenger whom I send? Who is so blind as he that is at peace with me, or so blind as the servant of Yahweh? And there are nuances in here that we can't go into. You have seen many things, but you do not observe them. Your ears are open, but none hears. You're not quite getting it. You're not quite getting it. You're seeing things superficially, but you're not seeing the big picture. Yahweh was pleased for his righteousness' sake to make the law great and glorious. But this is the people plundered and despoiled. And it goes on talking from there, and we don't have time to go through all of this. But these are the things that are being described here in this study, you see. Everything is being turned around, and he's restoring, you see. Yahshua's mission to inaugurate Yahweh's heavenly kingdom. 1. Yahshua went about announcing the arrival of Yahweh's kingdom, and he brought Yahweh's reign to bear on the lives of Israelites and non-Israelites living around Galilee. Notice Matthew's description, and we'll read that in a minute. Notice how Matthew equates Yahshua's announcement of the kingdom of Yahweh with two kinds of activity: teaching and announcing, as well as healing. Education and restoration, we might say, right? Teaching, announcing, as well as healing. Notice, and they go together. He's teaching and announcing, but he's healing at the same time. He's teaching and he's feeding. He's teaching and he's curing hunger. He's teaching and he's restoring the paralytic's hand, right? He's teaching and he's opening the ears of the deaf and the eyes of the blind. They go together. Notice also that these healings are for people who are sick, along with those who suffer what modern Western cultures would call mental illness, a sickness of the brain. And I want to say this too. It's like there's metaphor built into this, right? There's metaphor. Let me see if I can find something here for you. And there are so many things that we don't have time to go into right now, but Mark 8. So these are not just, it's not just physical healings for the sake of physical healings, right? There are object lessons that are happening here. Yahshua is teaching on several levels. There's a text and there's a subtext, yes? All right, so Mark 8:14, they had forgotten to take bread, did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. And he was giving orders to them saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And then I've explained this in sermons in the past. The leaven of Herod and the leaven of the Pharisees represent, again, instances of faith that are not being, that they're not following. They're, again, looking at the superficial, and the leavening represents this insincerity and this hypocrisy at both the government. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. So they're talking about leavening as teaching. So you have teachings of these government officials and these religious officials that are based upon hypocrisy and insincerity and not believing, not faith. And that's the tie-in that I was referring to in Matthew 8. And he's trying to get them to have a different way of thinking. Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart, etc.? You know, you have eyes, but you don't see. So this is the concept of the blindness, right? And I said, this is where I was going, which is why I wanted to go here in the first place. And I went to the wrong passage, but it was the idea of metaphor. You have eyes, but you don't see, right? They have ears, but they don't hear. So in bringing the healings to people, it was, yes, he wanted to relieve the suffering. He was reversing the curse of Eden, but it's more than that. It's metaphor. It's not just the blindness of the eyes physically. It's the blindness of the eyes to what's important in life and to Yahweh's truth. It's not the deafness in the ears, just the physical disadvantage of deafness. It's the not hearing with ears of faith. You have ears, but you don't hear. And then when you get down to verse 22, there's a specific instance that's occurring. And they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Yahshua and implored him to touch him so he could heal him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village. And after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" So this concept here, right? If I were doing this passage, I might use Mark 8, verse 23 as my key passage, right? Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village. And after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" I might choose this as my key center. Do you see anything, right? From a spiritual standpoint and from a physical standpoint. And he looked up and said, "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." It's interesting. He sees them like trees walking around. So he's starting to see, but it's not an instant healing. Why didn't Yahshua just heal him instantly? And why does he have to spit on his eyes and lay his hands on him? Is this just, is this drama? Is this political theater? No, it's lessons he's teaching here, I believe. He looked up and said, "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." Then again, he laid his hands on his eyes. And he looked intently, the man, he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." In other words, keep it sort of quiet, right? But he continues through this chapter in 27. "Who do people say that I am?" Remember, he's talking to his disciples, and they said, there are different versions of this in the Gospels. And they said, some said John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say the prophets. And he continued by questioning him, "Who do you say that I am?" That might be another key center if someone else is doing this passage. "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered and said to him, "You are the Messiah." And he warned them to tell no one about him. That's kind of a parallel to, he sent them to his home, "Do not even enter the village." He warned them not to tell anyone about him. And there's reasons for that as well. It's sort of a psychology that's going on there. But the point that I'm making here is that I would probably choose this. Do you see anything? That would be my key center. Why? Because there's something going on here. There's a text, and then there's a subtext. There's the thing that everybody sees, and then the thing that people do not see under the surface, right? They may see the healing, but they don't see that there's a healing of something deeper. It's not just the healing of the eyes. It's the healing of the curse that made the eyes deficiency possible. In other words, none of us were intended. There was never any intention for humanity to be sick in any way. We're supposed to be flourishing and healthy always, pictures of health. But sin and the fall brought us to a condition of degradation and deterioration. It's rebellion, it's disobedience, it's the curse of that, not necessarily these individuals, but the curse of that in humanity that brought us to the point of having blind and deaf and lame, which are all outward manifestations of something that was an inward problem. And it doesn't mean that someone who's blind, lest anyone misunderstand me, it doesn't mean that the person who's blind is a sinful person. We know that that's not true, right? Because John 9 tells you that. That's what people's inclination is to think. Hey, who sinned? Either this guy or his parents, that he should be blind. None of them. This has happened. The situation happened so that Yahweh could be glorified. Why are people blind? Why are people deaf? Because they're sinful? Because somehow Yahweh is getting even with their parents or whatever? Nonsense. No. There's blindness in the world, there's deafness in the world, there's lameness in the world, and everything else, because we live in a world that is in a fallen condition. And we all have different things that we're dealing with in life. And some of us are born that way, and some of us happen, because of circumstance or whatever. It's just part of the human condition. And no one is that particular way because they deserved it or because they didn't deserve it. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's just that we all, as human beings, we all deal with something. So maybe you're not blind, maybe you're not deaf, but maybe you're dealing with this other issue, and you're dealing with this other issue, and it doesn't have to be a physical issue. So what's happening here? There's a surface and then there's something underneath, and Yahshua is healing the whole business. But it's like people are very stubborn, right? Do you see anything? He says, I see men, but he only sees them like if they're trees walking around. He doesn't see the big picture yet. We're stubborn, right? So he lays his hands on him again. But notice that this time he looks intently, right? He looks intently. What is that? To look intently means that he really looks very carefully this time and was restored. It's almost as if to say, when we just look at things on the surface, old quickie like, we don't get it. But when we stop and we really consider it, and when we look intently, then that's when the restoration comes. And then that's when we begin to see everything clearly, you understand? This all culminates in Peter seeing, right? No one else sees it. So some say you're John the Baptist. They're all kind of beating around the bush. Well, some say, he says, who do people say I am? Well, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, etc. But then he says, he gets more pointed. He says, okay, but who do you say I am? All the answers, nobody's answering here. There's no left and right. John the Baptist, Elijah, you can almost see them speaking all over each other, right? But when he asks them, who do you say that I am? Only one answers, at least according to this text. Peter answered, the impulsive one, right? You're the Messiah. What else could you be? You see. Because why? Because Peter saw. Because he was intent. Yahshua is teaching both, is my point, right? When we go back to the main lesson here, is that he's not just healing for healing's sake. He's not doing it as a party trick, right? He's not doing it to curry favor among the crowd. He's doing it because he's reversing the curse. He's making the rough places plain. He's lifting the valley up. He's lowering the mountain. Those who think that they're important, he's bringing them down to the ground. Those who think that they're lowly and that they're nothing on this earth, he's raising them up to greater heights. Why? Because there's a political power play? No, because it's a question of we're all on an equal plane here. We're all human beings created in the image of Elohim. There is no you're great and you're not. The servant is the greatest because the servant serves, you see. Just like I did, not me, Carlos, just like I, Yahshua, did when I emptied myself, kinoo, Philippians 2 language, when I lay aside my special privilege in order to become a human being and dwell among you, Elohim with us, right? That's what I'm trying to teach you, is what he's showing here. Okay, let's just kind of wrap this up, and then we'll continue, Yahweh willing, next week. So finishing this section here. So Yahshua went about announcing the arrival of Yahweh's kingdom, and he brought Yahweh's reign to bear on the lives of Israelites and non-Israelites living around Galilee. Notice Matthew's description, and we'll read that. Notice how Matthew equates Yahshua's announcement of the kingdom of Yahweh with two kinds of activity, teaching/announcing, as well as healing. Notice also that these healings are for people who are sick, along with those who suffer what modern Western cultures will call mental illness, a sickness of the brain. In Yahshua's view of the world, sickness, mental illness, even death itself is a sign of our world's captivity to the powers of spiritual evil. There it is. His announcement of Yahweh's kingdom manifests itself in ministries of healing, generosity, hospitality, and welcome to the outsider, right? And this is why I read Isaiah 35 and Isaiah 42. These are the things that he's doing. He is announcing Yahweh's kingdom. This is why when John the Baptizer said, "Are you the ones to come?" He said, "Tell him what you're seeing." Because he had already said the kingdom of Yahweh is at hand. Did John not believe him? Well, John was suffering, right? He was suffering, and in John's mind, if the Messiah is here, he baptized him, right? He was there. He saw him. He's here. Why are things not changing? Why am I now in prison under this oppressor, under this oppressing Herod Antipas? Well, because everything is not fulfilled yet, right? The whole story is not complete yet. But he said to him, what are you seeing? What you're seeing is the announcement of Yahweh's kingdom. Then they brought him, this is Matthew 12, and we'll end up with this. Then they brought him a demonized man who was blind and mute, and Yahshua healed him so that he could both talk and see. And the people were astonished and said, could this be the son of David? But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, it's only by Beelzebub. And by the way, why do they have that reaction? Could this be the son of David? Well, what is the son of David? Well, son of David is code for Messiah, right? Is this the Messiah? Why would they even think that? Well, because they brought him a demonized man who was blind and mute, and Yahshua healed him. Why would they think? What does that have to do with Messiah? Why the leap from that to this, to being the son of David? Well, because they know Isaiah 35 and Isaiah 42 and Isaiah 40 and Isaiah 57 and half a dozen other scriptures and the prophets, etc. But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, it's only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that his fellow drives out demons. Yahshua knew their thoughts and said to them, every kingdom divided against itself will be ruined, and every city or household divided against itself will not stand. If Satan drives out Satan, he's divided against himself. How then can his kingdom stand? And if I drive out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your people drive them out? So then they will be your judges. But if it is by the Spirit of Yahweh that I drive out the demons, then the kingdom of Yahweh has come upon you. I want you to notice that also, right? If it is by the Spirit of Yahweh that I drive out demons, let me ask you, was it by the Spirit of Yahweh that he drives out demons? Clearly, right? If Yahshua drove out demons by the Spirit of Yahweh, then what? The kingdom of Yahweh has come upon you. Present. If it is by the Spirit of Yahweh that I drive out demons, and the kingdom of Yahweh has come upon you. So the idea he's telling them is, and if that's the case, why do you not recognize it, that the kingdom is here? Or again, how can anyone enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions until he first ties up the strong man? Then he can plunder his house. Okay, there are more connotations that we won't go into. So Yahweh willing, we'll begin next time with Yahshua's ministry of healing, a little bit more about that. And then we'll go to bringing the kingdom to Jerusalem. And eventually we'll get into Paul's letters and then the resurrection. So hopefully, like, you could see why this is so much more that we have to do here. So it's certainly one lesson, maybe two, right? Maybe two. If we can finish it all next week, we'll finish it. If not, then we'll just do two lessons. Okay. So we will leave it at that for now.